In this third video looking at Razor, we're going to discuss the filter section and the effects. Looking at the filters first. To select a filter type is quite simple. If we click on this drop down option here, then we can see the various different options that are available to us, and if we just turn the filter on, then we can also see the parameters which are available in each case. Assigning modulation is quite straightforward, so if for instance I wanted to adjust the cutoff of a low pass filter, I could do that by finding a free modulation source such as envelope 2, clicking here, selecting envelope 2 and defining the range like this. If we want to try a different filter type, let's click again here. For instance, let's have a look at a bandpass filter and just compare the difference here. So in this case, as well as our central cutoff frequency, we have a boosted region and we have our bandwidth, although you can see that the modulation that we've already assigned to the low pass filter has been carried over to our bandpass. We have some different options on filter 2. Let's bypass the bandpass just for a minute and have a look and see what we have here. One of the unique options to filter 2 is the comb filter. Let's have a quick look at that. So I'm going to turn that on and close this down so we can see what it's doing to the sound. At the moment it's completely static. If we increase and decrease the cutoff parameter here, then we get a pretty good idea of why it's called a comb filter. It's as if we've held a comb up to the frequency spectrum, giving us these various different teeth or notches. What we also have in this particular comb filter is the option to boost the areas in between the notches. So a little bit of movement here might be very nice. So perhaps we could use another free mod source such as an LFO. At the moment we have LFO2 and LFO1, both of which are in use. Perhaps we could use the slow movement of LFO2 just through a narrow range of our comb filter. So let's select LFO2 and define our range. To give us some subtle movement. And let's increase, or let's turn on our bandpass filter. Moving on to the dissonant effects. What these are designed to do is to manipulate the frequency of partials to introduce interesting detuning characteristics into the sound. And again, we have various different options to choose from. Perhaps this centroid is an easy way to understand how this works. What I'm going to do before I enable this is also turn on the limiter. And it's also worth noticing that the limiter is the only part of the synth which is not based on a principle of additive synthesis. This is actually a straightforward limiter, which is quite important using certain parts of the synth because we can introduce some quite resonant peaks, as we'll see. So if I increase this centro amount, you can see what we do is we squash all of the partials together just into a really narrow frequency spectrum. Which can be very useful for some quite dramatic effects. Maybe we could use it a bit more subtly by just introducing it just at the very beginning of a sound to give us some attack. So envelope 3 seems to be free, so let's click on our mod source, select envelope 3, define a range, and if we close this down, We can see that that's what's actually happening to the sound, but if we make the decay time very short, just introducing a little bit of attack into the sound. Finally, looking at the reverb effects here, these are particularly interesting because this is not a real reverb, this is an additive synthesis version of reverb. So what that means is if we choose the reverb sync option, every time we trigger a new note or chord, the previous reverb, which is a result of the previous note or chord, will be cut instantly. And this is quite useful for resolving issues such as discords or key clashes that can sometimes result from long reverbs. So we can have a really long reverb without any kind of discord as we trigger new notes. And to hear this in action, let's just turn the decay up quite high and the wet level quite high. So you'll notice that as we trigger a new note, the reverb cuts instantly. And perhaps this limiter is introducing a little bit more distortion into the sound that I would like, so maybe let's change this to something a little bit more subtle, like a compressor. And let's also introduce a little more of the dry signal back into the sound. And that concludes our brief look at Razor, capable of some really interesting sounds through this principle of additive synthesis that we would really struggle to achieve using other types of instruments.